Ross Bay Cemetery is one of Canada's oldest and largest surviving Victorian cemeteries. It takes its name from its unique location along the ocean in Ross Bay, Victoria. The cemetery was officially opened on March 1, 1873, and was used until 1927, when this Royal Oak Burial Park became designated as the primary burial location for the Greater Victoria area. With its ocean view and landscaping, it is a peaceful and inviting location for a walk, but it has had its share of controversy. The cemetery was established with the purchase of 13 acres and expanded once in 1893, again in 1906 to its final size of 27.5 acres. Originally, the cemetery extended close to the beach of Ross Bay. However, due to the erosion of the shoreline, there were stories of coffins floating out to sea and children found playing with the bones of people whose graves had been washed away. The controversy peaked in 1909 when a series of violent storms washed away a significant portion of the shoreline of Ross Bay, affecting a large number of graves from the Chinese, Japanese, and First Nations sections of the cemetery. This led a decision by the city to build a concrete wall along Ross Bay and extend Dallas Road to run between the cemetery and the new seawall, offering well-needed protection from the force of the ocean. When the cemetery was originally planned, the cemetery trustees intended it to be open for all burials without restrictions. However, strong pressure from the Anglican and Roman Catholic churches in town forced the trustees to reserve portions of the cemetery groups for burials by specific denominations. Eventually, sections were reserved for the Church of England, that's the Anglican, the Roman Catholic Church, the Presbyterian Church, the Wesleyan Methodist Church, and later the Reformed Episcopal Church. This resulted in only 10% of the entire site being available for use by the general public. 6 years after the cemetery opened in 1879, a bylaw was enacted that resulted in much more of the area becoming non-denominational. Now the cemetery is designated as a municipal heritage site and is a fine example of a Victorian-era cemetery. A number of well-known and historical figures from British Columbia's histories are buried here. People such as Billy Barker, Emily Carr, the painter, Sir James Douglas, along with premiers and court judges such as Sir Matthew Bailey Begbie. Sir Matthew Bailey Begbie was BC's first judge. He was an avid naturalist and opera singer and spoke several of the languages of the native peoples. He also became known, perhaps unfairly, as the hanging judge. Traveling on horseback to many locations, he dispensed justice from courts set up in tents. Begbie asked that he be buried with a simple funeral with no flowers and costing no more than $200. He asked for a simple wooden cross to be erected over his grave with his name and dates and the inscription, "Lord, be merciful to me as a sinner." Instead of a wooden cross, this imposing tombstone was erected. Born in 1871, Emily Carr was a Canadian artist and writer whose art captured the essence of Aboriginal people in her paintings. She did not gain recognition for her work until later in life. Emily Carr described herself as a little old woman on the edge of nowhere, but she clearly overcame any isolation that she might have felt living on the west coast of Canada by traveling, educating herself, and creating connections to cultural figures who supported the realization of her remarkable talent. Carr was an artist, writer, and mentor to younger artists who became identified as a pioneer of modernism and who came to rest in the sleepy cultural scene of Victoria. She passed away March 2nd, 1945. Billy Barker, the man responsible for building being the first to discover gold in the Cariboo located in British Columbia, is buried on the cemetery grounds at Ross Bay. He subsequently founded Barkerville, making him well known. In 1862, Barker traveled to Williams Creek from Richfield, where he found a spot to dig, ultimately discovering gold around the date of August 1862. This led to the development of stores and bars. During the winter, he stayed in Victoria, but upon returning to his claim, he found the town had been named after him. How he came to be buried in Victoria and not Barkerville was that he was living in a nursing home in Victoria at the time of his death on July 11th, 1894, and was penniless. James Douglas, who was a governor on Vancouver Island, can also be found at Ross Bay Cemetery. Douglas was a fur trader, and in 1858 he became the first governor of the colony of British Columbia. He was known as the father of British Columbia. He was born in Guyana. His father was a Scottish planter, and his mother was a Cree chief's daughter. At the age of 16, Douglas left Britain to enter the fur trade in the employ of the Northwest Company. He left Liverpool for Lachine, Lower Canada, now part of Montreal, in the spring of 1819. From 1819 until 1820, Douglas was stationed at Fort William, Ontario, now part of Thunder Bay, as a clerk. In 1820, he was transferred to L'Île-à-la-Crosse on the Churchill River in northern Saskatchewan. The Hudson's Bay Company was also active in this area, and Douglas was caught up in at least one confrontation with rival fur traders. At this post, Douglas continued a policy of self-education by reading books brought over from Britain and meeting with many First Nations people. The Old Cemetery Society conducts regular tours through the cemetery and has conducted extensive fundraising to maintain and even upgrade the cemetery with a project to install a grid system, making it easier to locate a particular gravesite among the 27,000 interments. In addition to the souls at rest at Ross Bay Cemetery, there are a few somewhat more restless spirits who make their presence known from time to time. One such ghost reportedly haunting Ross Bay is the ghost of Isabella Ross. She was the wife of Charles Ross, who built Fort Victoria. After Charles died, she bought 99 acres of waterfront farmland from the Hudson Bay Company in 1855 and built a farm there with her children. She was the first registered female landowner in British Columbia. Isabella died in 1885 while in the care of the Sisters of St. Anne. She was buried in an unmarked grave on the land that once belonged to her, within sight of her farm, near the bay that bears her name. But for whatever reason, her ghost has occasionally been spotted looking over the waters of Ross Bay. In 1994, the Old Cemetery Society erected a replica headboard similar to many that were found in the cemetery to mark her grave. A murky figure has been seen, thought to be David Fee, who was murdered by a Fenian gunman on the steps outside of St. Andrew's Cathedral in 1890 of Christmas Eve. Is he endlessly searching for his killer? And the ghost of an elderly couple dressed in Victorian clothing has also been spotted from time to time gliding along the west side of the cemetery.